Can this golden disk answer the biggest mystery of all?
Are we alone in the universe?
What secrets are hidden in a bizarre 600-year-old book that nobody can read?
The Voynich manuscript is one enormous puzzle. It could be a hidden key to unknown mysteries.
And is this stone mirror a conduit to the supernatural?
This weird thing is encased in mystery. Nobody knew how it worked or where this came from.
These are the most remarkable and mysterious objects on Earth. Hidden away in museums, laboratories, and storage rooms. Now, new research and technology can get under their skin like never before. We can rebuild them, pull them apart, and zoom in to reveal the unbelievable, the ancient, and the truly bizarre. These are the world's strangest things. This is the most distant man-made object in the universe, an eye-catching gold disk. It's already beyond the limits of our solar system, 14 billion miles from Earth. Now, to reveal its secrets, we're bringing it back home, virtually. This is the Voyager Golden Record. Just 12 inches in diameter. Etched onto its outer casing are what appear to be incomprehensible scientific hieroglyphs. And what's inside is even more bizarre.
It is a metal disc that is coated with gold and engraved with these very fine grooves that preserve information.
It looks like an LP record, because that's exactly what it is. A record of a very human planet. Pictures, sounds, music, and a message in 55 languages.
In essence, it's a time capsule, giving us a glimpse of the human world.
But this message is not designed for humanity.
The purpose of the disc was to explain what planet Earth is all about. And the goal was to pass that information on to aliens out there.
But how do you create something that can be understood by an alien species you don't even know exists? What exactly is on the disc? And why send it in the first place? By 1972, humans have put 12 men on the moon, sent 7 successful unmanned probes to Venus and 4 to Mars. But NASA wants to explore further, much further.
3, 2, 1.
In 1977,
We have ignition.
NASA launches 2 state-of-the-art space probes.
And we have liftoff, the first of 2 Voyager spacecraft to extend man's senses farther into the solar system than ever before.
Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. Their mission? To visit all the outer planets. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune for the very first time. But this will be a one-way trip.
If you want to send a probe to the outer planets, it needs to be traveling stupidly fast, about 10 miles per second. But when you're traveling at that speed, you can't stop. You sort of fly past all the planets, grabbing pictures as you go, and then you keep on going.
And that means after they'd finished their mission, they're just going to carry on out into interstellar space.
So NASA dreams up a plan for the probes to carry a message out into the universe. The Golden Record.
The idea was that if in some distant future, thousands or even millions of years hence, some alien civilization were to come across this bizarre artifact floating in deep space, and then maybe decode the information that's contained on it, find out something about the strange species that sent this tiny little traveler off deep into interstellar space.
It is a message in a bottle, a message to a race of spacefaring aliens.
So in my mind, the golden disc is, I guess, a dream, a hope that one day something out there might find it and realize that we're here and we're alive and we want to make contact.
But if NASA is really serious about making first contact with an advanced alien species, why on earth do they send something as old-fashioned as a record? That decision falls to the man who NASA selects to produce their interstellar message, Carl Sagan.
Carl Sagan was one of the most famous scientists and science communicators of the 20th century. At heart, he was an astronomer, but he was also one of the world's first astrobiologists. He was really interested in the nitty-gritty science of what aliens would actually look like.
Whatever format Sagan chooses to carry his message to the stars has to survive thousands of years. And space is a brutal place.
Beyond the Earth's atmosphere is a very harsh environment.
Radiation from the sun blasts you. Temperature ranges are suddenly huge.
It's a very dangerous environment. So it's actually very difficult to think about what sort of object is going to be able to retain information in that environment.
Sagan ignores the magnetic tapes used in 70s computers. The tape itself would disintegrate in space. Instead, he goes old school. Vinyl.
The idea of using a phonograph, a record, to send information seems bizarre. Even in the 70s, it was dated technology, but it was a good way to go.
It's a physical object. The information is stored on it in these tiny little grooves that are carved into the material. They're going to be able to withstand a bit of bombardment from high-energy particles.
They assume that any species capable of building spacecraft will be able to work out how to play the disc. And for good measure, they decide to include a record needle under the cover. But actual vinyl, the material, isn't space-proof. So they pimp it up.
They decided they would make it out of metal. And in fact, they made it out of engraved copper. And then to make sure that it was going to last for a long time, they coated the copper with gold. Because gold is a very inert metal. It doesn't corrode, it doesn't degrade easily.
Sagan's next problem is what to put on his intergalactic record. How can he sum up all of humanity and the world around us on a 12-inch LP? NASA has given astronomer Carl Sagan the job of sending a comprehensive message about us to aliens. But it's all got to squeeze onto a single 12-inch disc.
The challenge posed by this is immense. You have got one record, and on it you somehow have to sum up the nature of human civilization in all its many forms. What do you put on the record?
NASA gives Sagan just 8 months to complete and deliver the entire project. He builds a team from scientists, musicologists, and artists. It includes SETI pioneer Frank Drake and author Anne Druyan, Sagan's future wife. The first thing the disc does is say hi from everyone on Earth.
The beginning of the record has a greeting from the UN Secretary General and greetings in 55 different languages. One of the weirdest things is that two of those greetings, one of them is Sumerian and another is ancient Greek, neither of which have been spoken for quite some time.
Greetings done, the aliens can relax with 90 minutes of eclectic tunes, the greatest hits of an entire planet. You've got Mozart's Magic Flute Opera,
A Georgian folk song.
Johann Sebastian Bach, of course.
Songs from Navajo Indians.
The Brandenburg Concertos,
Indonesian gamelan music.
a Japanese song about cranes.
And of course, Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good.
Sagan is a pioneer here in that he's put together a collection of world music before the term or concept world music was really in common usage.
Then there's the sounds of the earth, a rousing compilation of wind, thunder, an erupting volcano, animal noises, Morse code, a train, a tractor, a moon rocket, and a kiss. Sagan wants this to be a truly multimedia experience for our new alien friends. So it gets a photo album too.
By an incredibly fortunate coincidence, the technology had just been developed to allow images to be recorded to vinyl discs.
But there is space for just 115 pictures. Surprisingly, Sagan wastes the first one on a plain circle.
The thinking being that circles are universal structures. They will be circles anywhere in the universe, and any alien civilization intelligent enough to start decoding this message will figure out pretty quickly that this was a circle.
So aliens can use this to tell if the pictures are the correct shape. That leaves space for just 114 more pictures to show to the aliens.
When we look at a photograph, you have a much better idea of what you're looking at than an alien might. So the picture of a couple of people holding hands, would an alien even recognize that those are separate organisms, or would they think that's just one giant creature?
The pictures they choose cover biology, animals, plants, our planet, our behavior, our civilizations, and our accomplishments, all in just 115 images. The final addition to the disc is a 1-hour recording of human brain waves, just in case aliens can read our minds.
The Voyager Golden Record is a pretty good answer to a frankly ridiculous question, which is, how can you encapsulate the entire works, the entire history of a species, life on a planet, a solar system, on basically two sides of a long playing record?
The content is the easy bit. The tricky part is the instructions. These will be engraved on the disc's cover. But how do you create instructions that aliens will understand? The team's only assumption is that anyone who finds the disc will already have made it into space. But they won't speak or read any human language, and their measurements for time and distance will be totally, well, alien. So what unit of measure could possibly be considered literally universal? The genius answer comes from Frank Drake.
If you listen to the universe with the right radio at the right frequency, you can hear a signal. And it's a signal that pervades throughout the universe, because it's a signal created by the most common element in the universe, hydrogen.
This signal is known as the hydrogen hyperfine transition.
Drake's choice of using the hydrogen frequency was a brilliant one. Any intelligent beings out there would be aware of this frequency.
Its wavelength is 8.28 inches long, and the time it takes for a single oscillation is 0.7 of a billionth of a second. And those measurements are the same everywhere in the universe.
Frequency of the oscillation gives you a universal unit of time. The wavelength of that oscillation gives you a universal unit of distance.
To explain this to aliens, Sagan engraves on the cover a tiny drawing of two hydrogen atoms representing the hyperfine transition.
So imagine you're an alien and you find this disk. You can use it to explain how tall a human being is or how big the solar system is in terms of hydrogen hyperfine wavelengths. Or you can use it to explain time, how long it takes a human baby to be born, or even how fast you have to play this record.
The next problem is numbers. How exactly does an alien count?
Now, most of us work in base 10. What that means is we've got digits from 0 to 9, which is 10 digits in total. And that makes big numbers easier to write in a small space. But essentially, it's completely arbitrary.
Sagan can't rely on aliens counting in tens. But there is one system that any intelligent being should recognize.
The numerical information on the golden record is encoded in binary, so just using ones and zeros. And the reason is that binary is perhaps the most fundamental numerical system. If they're advanced enough to be spacefaring, hopefully they'll be able to understand the mathematics that we've used.
At high magnification, you can see a picture of the record itself on the cover. And engraved around it, in binary, is the speed it should rotate at, 16 2/3 RPM. And a diagram of nearby stars with their distances, also marked in binary, gives directions to Earth. There's one last unplanned but very human addition to the record. Under extreme magnification, there's a faint inscription scratched into the surface by the men that cut the master disc. It reads, "To the makers of music, all worlds, all times." And there you have it, a snapshot of human life on Earth and the means for ET to read it, all contained in one LP. So what has become of these interstellar messengers? The Voyager space probes are carrying a message from Earth and are now over 11 billion miles away from our planet.
The Voyager spacecraft transformed our understanding of bodies that are out there. As the probes went through space, we get these images back, so close-ups of Jupiter. We could just about make the red spot out from Earth using telescopes. But now we could see a dynamic weather system churning around this amazingly huge planet. We went out to Saturn and saw a close-up of the rings. It just transformed our understanding. Neptune and Uranus had been just points of light from Earth, and now we could see them as sort of beautiful, sort of aquamarine bodies.
Incredibly, more than 40 years after launch, both Voyagers are still working. They have left the solar system, carrying our message on a golden disk out into the universe. It will be 40,000 years before either of them passes close to another star.
The golden record is a beautiful, hopeful message about a bountiful, amazing planet that it comes from. A huge mixture of different cultures and languages, and even emotions have gone into making this record.
The question is, will anyone or anything ever find them? In a locked cabinet at Yale University is a strange medieval book that has confounded historians for 100 years. There is just one copy in existence. We have no idea who wrote it, and we have no idea what it's about.
It's one enormous mystery.
This is the Voynich manuscript. It measures 9 by 6 inches, and its pages are made of calfskin parchment.
It has 240 pages, sometimes with inked illustrations.
Its pages are covered with incomprehensible writing.
It really looks like a language.
But is it?
We can't really make sense of the letters.
Why would anyone create such a detailed book and then make it impossible to understand?
The text is a riddle, but the drawings aren't much better.
It's packed with arcane symbols and bizarre illustrations, like naked ladies bathing, plants, and castles. Now, recent research may finally have uncovered hidden clues in these drawings that could help explain this mystery. Despite that, the Voynich manuscript remains an enigma. Where does it come from? How old is it? And what is it trying to tell us?
It could still be a hidden key to unknown mysteries.
Even a brief glance at this bizarre document raises one very obvious possibility.
When you take everything together, the illegible alphabet, the weird drawings, sooner or later you have to consider that might be a relatively modern hoax.
For decades, the Voynich manuscript has been tainted by accusations that it is a modern fake, created for the lucrative antiquarian book market. If it is, the prime suspect has to be the man who discovered it in 1912, Wilfrid Voynich.
Voynich spent his life looking for rare books and lost manuscripts. If you were looking for a character who would have had the correct mental equipment to construct such a fake, he would certainly be a candidate.
But it is also possible Voynich was the victim of a scam perpetrated by the people he bought the manuscript from.
He bought it from a monastery that was in dire need of money, so maybe they just made something up, gave it to him, sold it, and got some money for it.
To find the truth, experts have turned to science.
In 2009, scientists at the University of Arizona managed to use carbon dating to work out that the manuscript dated from somewhere between 1404 and 1438. So the vellum it's made from, at least, dates from the appropriate time.
But that doesn't mean it's written in the Middle Ages. Using old vellum or reusing pages from an old manuscript is a common forger's trick. To test this, scientists analyzed the ink, searching for synthetic modern chemicals.
The ink that was used on the manuscript is very similar to the inks that were used on other medieval manuscripts. They're made of things like hematite or iron, naturally occurring simple substances, rather than the complex hydrocarbons that are often used as pigments in modern inks.
The combination of different ancient materials is enough to convince experts.
If you look at the vellum and the ink and the dating of both, then you know that this is something that is really old.
Which means if it's a fake, it's not a modern fake. So could it be real? And if it is, what does it say? For decades, code breakers and linguists have been trying to decipher the extraordinary Voynich manuscript.
When we look at the possible alphabet, we see more than 20 letters, maybe 22, 25. We see something that could be vowels. We see something that could be numbers. But beyond that, nobody knows what this alphabet consists of.
Which suggests an obvious possibility. Perhaps it's not normal writing at all. Perhaps it's a code.
One idea is that the manuscript could have been written with what's called a substitution cipher. And this is a code where you simply take a given letter of the alphabet or a given symbol and replace it directly with another one. So A becomes B, B becomes C, and so on. And that means you can write things that look very difficult to read just at first glance.
But substitution ciphers are relatively easy for mathematicians to spot.
You look at the text and you see which letters occur most frequently. So, for example, in written English, the most common letter is the letter E. So, say you were to find a Z as the most common letter in the text that you were looking at, you could guess that maybe that Z corresponded to the letter E. And then you can go down looking at less and less frequent letters and slowly but surely build up a picture of the words.
Experts have tested this approach on the enigmatic writing.
When you try and do this with the Voynich manuscript, you don't come up with anything. Even when you compare it to loads and loads of different languages, there's just nothing that seems to work with this technique.
If it's not a code, maybe the Voynich manuscript is simply written in an unknown language. In 2013, mathematicians and computer scientists at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil test the Voynich language to see if it displays the same kind of patterns as known languages.
Scientists have tried to compare objectively things like word length and the number of letters with English and Portuguese in the Voynich manuscript to get some idea of whether or not even the kind of word groupings would make any sense. And generally speaking, it does kind of fit. It doesn't fit perfectly, but it's not outside of what we would expect.
What's bizarre is that you look at the Voynich manuscript, and even though we don't know what any of the symbols are or what they mean, they still seem to have these same kinds of patterns. This isn't just random gibberish. It really looks like a language.
So the Voynich writing seems to fit the pattern of a real language. But knowing it's a language is a long way from being able to translate it.
We can identify a word through two routes: that we've seen that word before, and that we've heard that word before. But the fact that we can't make out what any of the letters are leaves you in a kind of no man's land, because not only do we not know what these words are, but we have no idea how they sounded either.
Decades of analysis by code breakers and linguists have failed to unlock the manuscript's writing, which just leaves the illustrations. Could they crack the secrets of the Voynich manuscript?
The images on this text are some of the strangest things I've seen.
The manuscript is a riot of colorful and baffling illustrations.
It's a bit like a list of classes at Hogwarts. You've got kind of herbology, all these beautiful pictures of plants, and then you have things like images of naked women bathing, and then very detailed images of a castle.
Now, new research claims these drawings could finally answer the puzzle of the Voynich manuscript. In 2013, the manuscript's bizarre illustrations catch the eye of two U.S. scholars. They think they've seen some of the plants in it before.
A couple of American botanists have looked at these images, and they've seen similarities between the plants depicted in this manuscript and plants that are native and indigenous to Central America.
They identify nearly 60 plants in the Voynich manuscript that they believe show a striking correlation with Mexican plants. Agave, Dioscorea, Silene, Eryngium, and the viola, and many more. It certainly seems convincing at first glance.
The idea of identifying this manuscript and connecting it to scholarship from Central America is an interesting idea, and it's quite creative and innovative.
The botanists have also noted similarities between the Voynich manuscript and a well-known ancient manuscript on Central American herbology called the Codex Cruz Badianus. So has this new research finally begun to crack the secrets of the Voynich manuscript? Can its origins be traced to Central America? Is it a Mexican herbology of plants? Indigenous cultures certainly have writing and a sophisticated knowledge of the natural world. But there are problems with this idea. For one thing, the timing seems off. The vellum in the Voynich manuscript has been dated to around 1404 to 1438. The problem is, and it's a big one, at this date, Europeans won't discover the Americas for another 50 years. And the Codex Cruz Badianus that it's been compared with isn't written for 100 years after the vellum's dating. Is it possible that after someone made this valuable vellum, it sat unused for 100 years? It's not completely out of the question, but it does seem pretty unlikely. And even if you ignore the dating issues, other illustrations point towards an origin much closer to home.
There is an intricate drawing of a castle, and there are aspects of the architecture that are identifiable as what they would call Ghibelline architecture. It's particularly, I think, the crenellations on the turrets. And they're in kind of central northern Italy, around that kind of northern border.
So, is it a book on Mexico or some unknown text on Europe? Or something else entirely? No one seems certain. But there is one final clue. A clue that might at last tell us the origins of the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is a 500-year-old document, written in an untranslatable text and covered in strange images. It has baffled scholars for centuries. But there is one final clue to its origins. A letter dating to 1639 that mentions the manuscript.
According to the letter, the book was owned by an alchemist in Prague by the name of George Baresh.
Almost nobody had ever heard of Baresh, But there is a second clue that also ties the manuscript to Prague. But it's only visible under UV light.
Another tantalizing detail is that a signature was found on the title page of the volume of a man named Tapenitz, who was a herbalist in the court of Rudolf II.
Rudolf II, the Holy Roman Emperor, one of the most colorful characters in Renaissance Europe.
Rudolf II was exactly the sort of person who would want to acquire a manuscript like this. He had the money, he had the interests, and he didn't necessarily need to understand it himself. He just needed enough people around him telling him that it was fascinating and important.
So could Prague and Rudolf II explain the manuscript's origins?
If you were looking to sell something for a high price, something which featured an untranslatable text and mysterious illustrations, which seemed to cross continents and cultures, what better place to try to shop this than in the court of Rudolf II?
Is this the real truth behind this strange book? Unfortunately, there seem to be as many explanations as there are experts.
I personally see a lot of drawings and scripts and very, very long texts of people who have a psychosis.
People with psychoses can construct their own reality, unconnected to the outside world.
So maybe our basic assumption is wrong, that this is a language that we can ever understand, comprehend and decode. So maybe for everybody else except of that person, it will never make any sense.
So could it be the result of psychosis? Or could it simply be an ancient fraud?
I don't think the Voynich manuscript was created ultimately to be understood, but to puzzle, to deceive, to fascinate, and perhaps to get a sack of gold from Rudolf II.
Maybe the real secret of the Voynich manuscript is that it will always remain an unsolvable puzzle.
I kind of love how it remains a mystery, and it remains something that we can continue to speculate because we don't know what it says.
In 1966, the British Museum in London acquires one of its eeriest artifacts. It appears to be a very plain black disc. It's a great deal more than that. It is a macabre supernatural device whose origins have perplexed experts for centuries.
This weird thing is encased in mystery. Nobody knew how it worked or where this came from.
Now, using the latest graphics technology, we can shed new light on the obsidian mirror. Roughly 7 inches across and a half an inch thick, it is made from a single slab of obsidian, a stone born in the heart of a volcano.
It's a natural form of glass, but its very nature, it has this glassy black sheen to it.
But in the mirror, these natural properties have been taken to unnatural extremes.
It's clearly been very, very worked and polished into this final form, and it shines like a mirror.
But this isn't a mirror intended for the human world. It has a much more macabre purpose. Now, new research can finally reveal the incredible origins of the obsidian mirror. So where does it come from? Who made it? What is it?
When the British Museum acquired this object, it came with a little note that claimed this was the stone with which Dr. D called his spirits.
There is only one famous Dr. D in history. John Dee, a shadowy, enigmatic figure from Tudor Britain 500 years ago.
So who was Dr. D? Well, that's actually quite hard to pin down. He's quite a slippery character. Was he a magician? Was he a scientist? Was he a philosopher? Was he an astrologer? He sort of sat on the boundary between what we now think of as science and what we now think of as magic.
Dee's reputation as a man of knowledge sees him rise to the position of astrologer and personal advisor to Queen Elizabeth I.
She, on occasions, actually visited him in his house. They had consultations about the future, about the nature of the universe, about how she should run the country. This is a man who had his finger right in the middle of the political heart of the nation, a man with influence.
But the volcanic mirror isn't part of his cultured life in the Elizabethan court. John Dee uses it to speak to the dead. This obsidian mirror was one of the strangest possessions of Elizabethan alchemist John Dee.
Many of us think of alchemists as people who are trying to turn lead into gold, but actually, they were much more interested in finding something called the Philosopher's Stone. And what they meant by that was something that would prolong life and give you the answers to the meaning of life. So in searching for this Philosopher's Stone, he became convinced that he could seek the assistance of angels.
The obsidian mirror is central to this obsession with the occult. A note attached to its case claims Dee uses it for calling spirits.
He is known to have attempted to raise spirits, to speak with them, in a search for more knowledge, to try and speak with otherworldly beings.
The obsidian mirror is Dee's supernatural gateway to the other side.
In order to communicate with these angels, he began to use something that he called a scrying stone or a seeing stone. And it may well be that this object is that stone.
So it appears John Dee uses this object to summon spirits. And that's not as surprising as it sounds, because this connection between mirrors and spirits is very old indeed.
Looking into a glass or mirror in order to try and see something more is a very ancient idea. People have been doing it for a long time.
More than 1,500 years before John Dee, the Celts in the British Isles are already using bronze mirrors and pools of water to connect with their gods and spirits. Could this ancient British mystical connection between spirits and mirrors explain why this strange obsidian object turns up in Tudor England? Unfortunately, there's one big problem with that theory.
We don't have obsidian in the UK. There's very small ancient volcanic rocks which have some glassy bits, but nothing that would give you such a beautiful object that we see in this mirror. So it must have come from somewhere else.
So where on earth does it come from? And who made it? Whoever is responsible for this supernatural spirit mirror went to great lengths to craft it.
It's been made out of one piece of obsidian, which is really quite hard to find because often it's fractured in many places. So they must have really looked hard to find a natural example that they could work up into this wonderful mirror.
But to produce this mirror-like finish out of rock as hard as obsidian would mean weeks of grinding and polishing by hand.
It must have meant something very special to the people that made it.
For hundreds of years, the origin of the mirror remains a mystery. But in 2019, the University of Manchester in England analyzes the mirror's chemical fingerprint using a cutting-edge technique called X-ray fluorescence.
Different magma bodies in different parts of the Earth have different chemical fingerprints. And so if you can analyze what the mirror is made up of, and you can work out which volcano or which area that it fingerprints to, bingo, you could find out where it came from.
The results are astonishing.
They traced the composition of this obsidian back to the jungles in the Sierra de las Navajas in Mexico. And there they found ancient quarries that had been worked for over 3,000 years, where they were taking obsidian from a 2-million-year-old volcano. And that's the actual birthplace of this beautiful obsidian mirror.
But this doesn't tell us when it was made.
You can date the age of the rock that made the mirror, but it's actually impossible to date exactly when this mirror was manufactured by human hands. And so it could well have been hundreds of years old when Dr. D got his hands on it. It's difficult to know.
So chemistry doesn't hold the answer, but maybe archaeology does. Over 700 years ago, when these quarries were being mined for obsidian, the area was ruled by the Aztecs. And the mirror fits into the Aztec story like a missing puzzle piece, because the Aztecs' religion is known to involve obsidian mirrors. In fact, the name of one of their gods is Tezcatlipoca, meaning smoking mirror. And he is shown in some images clutching an obsidian mirror. And this is where things get very strange, because some Aztec rulers possessed a mirror known as a Tezcatl that they used to travel to the underworld and talk to the dead, which is an astonishing coincidence, given that is exactly what John Dee uses it for. The mirror probably reaches Dee via the Spanish conquistadors, who invade Aztec Mexico in 1519 and carry its treasures away to Europe.
It's no real surprise that somebody like Dr. D might get his hands on it. It's going to be encased in mystery, and that's absolutely his bag. He is Mr. Mystery.
This strange, inky black object connects two different cultures, separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Both identified it as a supernatural doorway to the spirit world. Who knows? Maybe John Dee now sits on the other side of the mirror next to its Aztec owners, looking out at us.